I can see why that would be a popular question, because this notion of balance is something that comes up quite a lot, and it's one of those terms that I think is quite tricky, because we think about it, balance is actually an active state. If you think about yourself trying to balance on a balance beam, you can't just relax whilst you're up there. You are constantly trying to stay in balance, and it can start to feel like a fight, like a tussle. And I think that can potentially be where we get a bit unstuck with this idea of with balance, when we have things on different camps. It's like we say we have motherhood over here and our goals and aspirations over here, and they are fighting against each other. And it's like, and we can't have things in a neat 50-50 split, can we, with us having this perfect state of balance in the middle. It's always going to be a moving feast, because even if you obtain what you think feels like a balanced state for a while, taking yourself off the beam now and going into a normal work-life situation, there'll be a time when you might think, oh, this is in a pretty good state of balance, but then something happens in your home life and it'll occupy more of your time, or something happens at work, like a big, perhaps they're going through a restructure or something, and that's going to suddenly take up a lot of time. There's going to be things that always sort of move and put the balance out of kilter. So I think that's one of the things that makes it a little bit problematic. And like I said, it's this idea of things being against each other. So I came up with this idea. It was actually during a client session, and I ended up drawing it with her. And I call it the life seesaw. And it's not so much that you've got things on either end, like fighting against each other, but the way I see it is we've got all these elements in our lives, and they can either be things that sort of weigh it down or buoy it up, and they're in all elements of your life, not just the motherhood part, your personal goals and aspirations. So for example, if you can picture the seesaw, and I said sometimes you've got boxes on the seesaw, sometimes they're heavy, sometimes they've got lots in them, like when you're moving house, right? That's going to be a big heavy box and it's going to take up a lot of time and energy, but then you get to hopefully take some things out of the box. So there'll be things like your obligations and your responsibilities go in the boxes, but then you've got your balloons that try and sort of lift it up. So there'll be things like your support network and your self-care mechanisms, all those kinds of things. So the way I see it is that we try not to think of it as things against each other. We try and look at the whole seesaw, which is you and your life, and where are your boxes and where are your balloons, and what can we do to try and bring balance in that sense? What can we do to help bring it up when it's feeling weighed down? Because some of the weights we can't do a huge amount about. Hopefully we can with some of them, but we can try and disperse the weight a bit better there. And I'd say that, yes, really, and I heard this term a long time ago, someone saying they didn't like the term work-life balance. It's really a work-life blend. I thought that's actually quite a healthy way of looking at it. So instead of this kind of like seesaw weighing up sense, you've got all the things on there, but the important thing is that you feature. So the way I'd say that coaching helps is that, well, certainly my perspective of coaching is, where do you feature in this? What is it you want for you? What is your idea of what you'd like to be as a mother? And also, what do you want for yourself? And we try and make sure both of those elements are there on that seesaw somehow. And what can we do to support those? The main thing there is to say, you're not going to be alone, 100%. I don't think I'll have ever encountered any mother who thinks, well, I've got this nailed the whole time, all the time. That just doesn't happen, because the truth is we don't get a manual. It's not like a job where there's perhaps a right way of doing it. It is you uniquely as a mother, and then your child who's also unique, and then the blend of you two together. And if you think about that, no one else is going to have that combination at all. And yes, there are people with similarities, and yes, and cultures and all the rest of it, but actually the unique combination is only yours. So we are all finding our own way in that respect at any point in our motherhood journey as ourselves, our child, and that relationship. So I think that to try and ask yourself some questions, rather than going down the sort of rabbit hole of, am I doing this all wrong? Doubting what you're doing. And it's very easily done. I'm not saying I haven't done it myself, but it's like, what actually are my intentions and how am I trying to fulfill them? Just try and take it back to some basic questions. And also, and I know this is sometimes easier said than done, trying not to get too hung up on the small stuff. I know hindsight is a wonderful thing, but sometimes, when something happens and it really matters and you're all devastated, but then later on you realize it's not as bad as you thought. And it can be as simple as something like, I've cooked them this amazing meal and now they've not eaten any of it and it's so disappointing, and all those kind of things. It's trying to ask yourself, will this matter in X period of time? Like really think, and the shorter that period of time becomes, I think you can realize how much smaller an issue it actually is. Even though our emotions kind of run riot at the time, you can actually sort of bring it back down to thinking, will this even matter this time tomorrow? Probably not. It's probably just one of those things. And the thing about mum guilt is so frustrating. I wish it wasn't a thing, mum guilt, or you could call it parent guilt, to be honest with you, but rather than just mum guilt. But somehow it is a thing. And as much as I wish it wasn't. And I think I've been trying to think about why do I think this is the case? And I think it's because if you think about it, we're assuming responsibility for another person, whereas we know as coaches, ultimately we're only really responsible for ourselves, our own behaviours, thoughts, actions, and so on. Obviously, we've got a tiny baby in the early days that we are responsible for. Absolutely, we need to protect them, look after them. But even with that being the case, we still can't control everything. And sometimes their responses have got nothing to do with us. Going back to the example of, you've lovingly home cooked a meal and pureed it and everything, and they just turn their nose up at it. It's not to slight you or anything that you've done or anything you've done wrong. It's just a response that they've had in the moment. And I think the mum guilt comes in because we are assuming so much responsibility for another person, including the stuff that we can't really control. In coaching we talk about those spheres of control. It's like we've put more in that middle circle than we've tried, than ultimately we can be responsible for. So again, I kind of come back to some of those questions of maybe saying something like, what does it mean to me to be a good mum? And how am I trying my best to do that? So rather than focusing on all the things to be guilty about, which there seems to be an endless raft of them, things like, have you chosen to breastfeed or not, or why not, or can't you, and all that kind of stuff. You seem to have guilt to go with these things. Ultimately, again, what it means to be a good mum is I'm trying to keep my baby happy and healthy, and I will do that in the means that will be as best as I can. And the things don't always work out as we'd hoped necessarily. And there's some things we can change and some things we can't. So there's a little bit of acceptance, and I know that's hard to come by, but I'd say coaching can help you, I think, come to terms with the things that you can accept, the things that maybe you can change, and the things that you can't. And I think, that can definitely help with mum guilt, because at the end of the day, we're human. We're only one human as well, and we're not superhuman. So I guess what I'd say to that is, for me, those aren't two things that are in opposition. In fact, what you're looking at is for things to be, this is a very coachy word, alignment. I don't always love buzzy coachy words, but actually this one, it kind of makes sense, because I think if things start with our values, everything else kind of stems from there. If you think about your values being ultimately what matters to me, which is what we were talking about right at the start, what actually does matter to me? Is it status and money, or is it actually something else? And then we can stem from there with what our goals are, and how we can achieve them. And that can be in whatever area of life you're looking at, whether that's parenting, career, personal aspirations. So I don't see those things as being in conflict. I think that they are things that actually, it gives you a sort of foundation from which to form those goals. And like I said before, it's about making sure that you feature in there as well. So if you're talking specifically about parenting goals, it's about, well, what kind of parent do you want to be? Will you be a working parent? Will you be a stay-at-home parent for a certain amount of time? And it will change as well over time. It's not one thing set in stone forever. I think that's the other thing. As humans, we get very hung up on, I make this choice and that's my life forever. And it doesn't have to be. We know that things aren't necessarily permanent. We make a decision, we see how it pans out, and then we reassess and choose again if we need to. And the beauty of coaching is you decide at these various points in that journey. We're not going to perhaps make one decision and it's going to be absolutely perfect forevermore. We make a decision as best as we can at this moment in time. I say we, ultimately it's the client. No one tells you what to do. That's the beauty of it. And then you see how that pans out and then decide if you need to reassess and make a different choice for you. So I'm hopeful that actually coaching is definitely helpful when it comes to the defining bit, because it's working out what matters. And then the achieving bit is, well, how are you going to do that? And the coach can help keep you accountable for that as well. I think some people really enjoy having that kind of check-in. How's it going? What actions have you taken? Are you struggling with this thing? Perhaps why is that? And we start again. It's okay. You don't have to worry about impressing a coach or feeling like you're falling behind. There'll be something behind it. We'll get to the root of that, and then we move on again.